If you have followed the rules but feel unsatisfied with where that's gotten you, this podcast is for you.
We'll help you learn how to reach your goals through creativity, intuition, and flow.
Welcome to the Flow into Authenticity podcast.
Hi!
Hello, everybody.
Greetings and salutations.
Welcome back to the podcast.
Sound like Charlotte from Charlotte's Web.
Aw.
Salutations.
Salutations.
Jen is our soft, sweet voice.
Yeah, Esther's the sexy voice and I'm the excited voice.
Yeah. It's
Yes.
a good combo.
Yeah.
So
How's everyone
yeah,
doing today?
I am doing pretty good. Yeah.
Do you want to say something about your very cool art gallery
Oh yeah.
curation?
So I just had one of my first curated exhibits that I curated with my co-curator Shireen, and we curated a show in Seattle with all women and non-binary artists, and it was all about artists who are exploring their bodies and sexuality and sensuality. And it was so amazing. And it felt so great to be able to just empower people and just had a really great turnout. So yeah, it felt
Awesome.
really good.
Woohoo.
Yeah.
How about you, Jen? What's going on for you today?
My vibe right now is getting back into the swing of things. I am just coming back from an extended period of travel, and today is my first day to really start reestablishing my routines. So that's
Awesome.
I'm feeling like the let's get back into a regular groove vibe right now.
Get your groove on. By the way,
Love
for
it.
those folks who missed our last episode, Jen is our newest co-host, Jen Sorensen. We're
Yay.
super excited that she's with us.
Yay.
And me, I just sent my kids off to school. My son just started kindergarten and I sent him on the school bus today.
Oh,
So
Congratulations.
Charlie.
it was so awesome. I've been nervous about this for like the last 6 months. Just worried that he would be scared or worried that people wouldn't be nice to him. And he was just like, he woke up early today and he put on his clothes right when he was asked to. And he was like super jazzed and, trotting on to his bus stop and just really excited when he got on the bus. And so I'm feeling really excited for him.
Oh, that's awesome. A whole new
Yeah.
season for
A
all of
whole,
us.
yes, a new season. In more ways than one. So
Mhm.
today we are going to talk about how the flow method, which will remind you what that's all about, how that corresponds to the seasons or a way of thinking about flow in terms of seasons. So maybe I could just give a brief overview of flow, and then maybe Esther, you could talk about how you view the flow process through the lens of the seasonal changes.
Yeah, that sounds good.
So, flow, the F flow is an acronym for us. The F stands for finding inspiration. The L stands for letting go of assumptions. The O stands for opening up to possibilities, and W is working it. But before any of that happens, there's kind of a step zero in this process, which is this this understanding that something is not quite working for you. Something is off, and you just need to, first of all, notice that something's off, something's not working, and look inward. Ask yourself, how am I feeling? Something's not feeling right. What does that feel like? And then from that understanding, that recognition that something is not working for you, then you can embark upon this flow process, where the first step is to find inspiration for, if something's not working, well, what, how could it work differently? What's another possibility for how things could play out in your life? And then once you kind of play around with these possibilities, then there's this part of your brain that's like, oh, well, I couldn't do things differently because of this, or, I have this constraint that won't allow me to do this cool thing that I'm thinking of doing. So the next step is like letting go of those assumptions and expectations about what things should look like, how they should go. And then O is opening up to possibilities, learning, studying, talking to people, meeting people, thinking about, what your life could look like, how it could be different. And W is working it. So you know what needs to change, you kind of know how to change it. You've questioned your assumptions and let go of the ones that you need to let go of, and you're just, working it. You better work. So, but this is a cycle. We don't just get stuck one time in our lives and like, okay, we're stuck. Okay, we fixed it. Now we're never going to get stuck on anything ever again in our whole lives. So that's not how things work. It's a cycle, just like the seasons. And so I'm hoping that Esther, you're ready to take over to talk about how you can think about this in terms of the seasons.
Yeah, for sure. So we're heading into the fall season here. So yeah, really if we if we look at the seasons in our planet and our earth, um a lot of times we're just super indoctrinated from the culture that we're in that we should always know what we're going to do, have a plan, or be doing it, right? Like be productive, be in that fall season. But it's not how it works. So every time, so I like to say, like, we always are growing and expanding as humans, right? There's something in us that wants to grow and expand. And there's these seasons and these stages in our life. And so every time things need to change in our life, we go through this flow. And all we need to do is look at nature to show us how to do it and do it in a way that's easier, a little bit easier instead of forcing and pushing ourselves. So, yeah, did you want me to describe them or
Yeah. So,
should we
but
go
where,
through each season?
yeah, where does it start? So, what
Yeah.
season corresponds in your mind with the F, finding inspiration? And even before then, like what season corresponds to just feeling like something's not working?
Yeah. Well, Jen had a really good question. Can you repeat your question that we were talking about before we hopped on?
Sure, sure. I was thinking a little bit about, and perhaps this will make more sense in the context as you're talking about F being our winter season, but this notion of finding inspiration I, within versus finding inspiration in the context of the external stimuli in the wider world.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that because yeah, so when we think about winter season, right? We think about at least here in the northern hemisphere, you think about it being sort of cold and dark and quiet. And so a lot of times even before we get to that finding inspiration outside of us, um it feels almost like it feels not productive, right? It feels like this quiet time in our life. And what we want to do before we go kind of externally outward, and it's very interesting. I just want to like put the little like neuroscience thing in here. as well. So we have, well, neuroscientists have kind of, and I talked about this before on the show, but they've um, figured out sort of that we have two primary, there's actually three, but two primary systems in our brain. One of them goes inward. So we're focused inward into ourselves. This is a default mode network. And then there's an external system that is like focused outward. And so that's really interesting to note that this is like a natural process as well in the going back and forth of I'm going inward and then I'm going outward. So going inward, when we're in that stage where we're just in that winter season, or even like, yeah, before we start finding inspiration, it's really important to really recognize, oh, I'm in this dark season. I'm in this kind of confusion, maybe. And that going inward is so important during that time to connect to your intuition, because everything that you, and to just really accept where you are and be, and sort of get quiet and listen to your own inner voice. So, and then from that place of really acceptance, like, this is where I'm at. I don't have all the answers. And then when you feel like you have the energy for that, going out and sort of finding those seeds of inspiration that you're going to be planting in the seasons to come, right? So going outward, so finding inspiration is the winter, is like really going outward and looking and seeing what am I curious about. So I share like an example of this, or do,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah,
because I
yeah.
think it would be easier to kind of understand, and we've shared it before, but um so for instance, in my last sort of winter season, I remember I was on this walk. I had such a hard time. You guys all know because you heard us talk about this on the podcast, but I was on this walk and I really came to this conclusion on this walk. I was like, is this feeling like from COVID? Is it just something that I need to put up with, or is it something that needs to change? And it on that walk, I was like, no, this, I've felt this feeling before, and it was something needs to change. So I just came to that conclusion, right? And so that's, I think, that pre-step. And then I talked to my husband and I was like, I can't live in this house one more winter. Like, I cannot live here. I want to move. And it took him a little bit, but he was like, I want to move too. And so we started finding inspiration. And by that, I mean, we started looking at, what do I want? What do we want? What do we need? How do we want to feel? And going and looking at, I did this, I just found this vision board that I made, and it was like all windows. It was all windows because all I could see in my next house was like window. I wanted a view. I wanted windows. I even put water in there, and I put like a trip to Europe, which this all happened. Okay, this is crazy. But we made this list and we went and looked at different apartments or houses. And so finding inspiration this winter season, it's really about like expanding yourself and getting, and in a way it's like it's both, right? It's getting to know, like, what do I need? What do I want? How do I want to feel? And what's out
What's
there?
out there? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So this could be for anything. It could be, I did this when I found a partner, my husband. I did this when I, changed jobs. It could be for anything,
And
right?
actually within that that's not even linear. It might be a
No, none
back
of
and
this is
forth
linear.
between the internal and external. You're like, "Okay,
Mhm.
something needs to change. What could it look like?" And then, checking in with yourself again, like, "How am I reacting to this
Yes,
possibility?"
that's why connecting to your intuition is so
Mhm.
important, and getting to know that first, because, and that's what we do in our brain, especially creative people. We go back and forth between the default mode network and the executive network, back and forth, back and forth. And the best creative people can do that, go back and forth. So you're
Wait a
going
minute,
outward
Esther.
and then you're going inward. Yeah.
Isn't everyone creative though?
Yeah. Everyone's creative.
So isn't creative
Everyone.
people every person?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I will say what
Anyway.
I really love about that description, Esther, is um, it pushes back against hustle culture.
Yeah.
I mean, that notion that we always have to be doing and creating or whatever the thing is, that sometimes it is appropriate to draw inward, to be restorative, to listen. And I love that idea of asking yourself what you need and then gentle exploration, right? It sounds
Yeah.
very gentle.
Yeah.
Um, and just allowing that interplay between the inward and the outward in a way that's very natural.
Yeah. And that's what the seasons show us, you know? The seasons show us we don't have to be hustling all the time. This is a time when it is gentle. You're preparing the soil, right? And it is like it can be a harsh process, but like it's also this like nourishment, right? You're bringing nourishment and there's a lot of play. So there's play and exploration in that kind of finding that inspiration. It's you want to be in this sort of open state where it's receptive, you know, so that that
Mhm.
fertile soil can actually start to grow things.
Yeah. And it's before you've even really planted any seeds. You're still figuring out, what do I want to grow? Like, do I
Yeah,
want to grow tomatoes this year or sunflowers or, dahlias? What do I want to grow? So it's before you've even planted those seeds,
yeah.
before you've even had the conversation like, oh, tomatoes don't grow well at my house. I can't possibly grow tomatoes.
Right.
Well, what if
Sounds like
I
you are making an assumption.
I know
Oh, that leads
exactly.
us it leads us into spring.
Exactly. So in spring, what happens?
So spring, a couple of things happen, right? So you maybe have started to plant the seed, right?
Mhm.
Because maybe you found a seed that, or a few that you are interested in, right? And so you might be starting to see a little bit of things coming together, you know? Oh, like in my case, oh, I know I want big windows and I've seen this place. Like I posted this photo of this amazing apartment on Instagram on my stories. And I was like, this is my next apartment, y'all. If you've seen it, like, just let me know. And everybody like laughed at me, which is funny because my apartment is amazing now. So, but I saw this, right? Like, I saw this image. So it's like you're getting these um, little sprouts, it's like hope, right? So
Mm.
spring feels, you're not in that dark winter anymore where you can't really see anything. You're starting to feel like maybe you know what you want and things might be possible. And then another thing happens, which is your brain kicks in, your logical brain, and it says like, uh well, I know all of these things about your past and everything that I've seen in the past, and that's not possible. What you want is not possible, right? So it gives you all these assumptions, your logical mind. So, like the people who saw that post of mine are probably like, that's never going to happen in Seattle. You're never going to be able to find that, right? And
Right. So that's
Mhm.
actually an important message. Sometimes the assumptions aren't coming from
From
inside
you,
you.
yeah, right.
Sometimes
Right.
it's like you saying, No, I want an apartment with windows, and I think that this is possible, and everyone's like, "Nah, you're never gonna get an apartment
Right.
with windows." And so part of that process if is having that courage to not listen to other people about what you can and can't do.
Yeah, and that's the beautiful thing about, digging deep into that first winter season, digging deep into your intuition and getting to know yourself, is it makes it that soil even stronger when people do come and doubt
Mm.
you. So, yeah, so spring is about letting go of assumptions, really.
And
So,
then summertime?
well, does anyone have a story about
Ooh.
letting go, Jen?
Yeah. I mean, I went through a period, well, for about a decade, my work had two kind of primary roles. So there's a big chunk of my work that was administrative, and then another big chunk of my work that was more teaching and student focused. And all of a sudden, my administrative role went away. And so this for me, I mean, letting go, if this was letting go in multiple senses. Number one, a big chunk of my professional work and my professional identity was disappearing. But then that also forced me to do two things. Number one, it created the opportunity for me to think about, okay, so if this half of my work is disappearing, what's going to come in its place? But it forced me really to consider my assumptions of what does it mean to be a successful academic? What does it mean traditionally to be a professor? And are there ways that I can redefine my work and what I want my role to be to really fit my interests and my passions? So this was a period of both letting go of the old aspect of my job, and letting go of um, both internal and external assumptions about what being a professor would mean for me.
Mm, wow. That's so beautiful. So, I just want to say too, like, a lot of times our winter doesn't come from just us. Like a lot of times it is an external thing that happens like in our job. Like maybe you lose, like you said, you lose part of your job or you lose your job entirely. And that kind of forces us into that winter where
Mm.
we're like, oh, it's like letting something die, right? Winter's all about letting the old die. And then it's like, oh, well, right? Like, what is next? So I have to let go of those assumptions of what it could be. That's so beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. So, actually, with that example, what did summer look like for you, Jen? So, summer is when you open up to
Mm.
possibilities. What did that opening look like for you?
What that looked like for me was finding and developing a network of new collaborators that just launched me on an entirely new pathway for my scholarly endeavors, for some university projects and kind of bigger projects beyond the university that I got involved in. It really just launched me into a whole area of work that if you had asked me, a couple of years preceding that, I, it's like I didn't even know that it existed. I didn't even
Mm.
know that it was possible.
Mm. I'm picturing like the leaves coming into the trees and the flowers popping up and all of this explosion of color in the garden as you're making these new collaborations and planting. So you've already planted the seeds, but you're starting to see what that might look like, what those flowers that you planted, what they look like when they start to open up and bloom. That is so cool.
Yeah, and it really was. In this case, these flowers that I could not have even anticipated, including uh, articles and conference presentations and a book chapter and grant proposals and like all of these things that um, were so enriching that 5 years previous I had no idea they weren't even on my radar screen of things that I wanted to get involved in professionally. But when the possibilities arose, I had created the space. I had created the conditions for getting involved with all of these new projects.
Did you think that you couldn't do that stuff? Did you think you couldn't write a major grant proposal or you couldn't write a book chapter like as the type of professor you used to be?
Yeah,
That's interesting. Just
Yeah,
because
yeah.
you
yeah.
didn't have the bandwidth or that wasn't the type of thing you should do or what was it?
It really it was bandwidth because half of my job was administrative. And Allison is somebody who's had some administrative work in your background. You know that that can expand to fill all the available time and then
Mm,
some if you let it. Um,
mhm,
and I think in my case, I found it very fulfilling. I
mm,
found it very enjoyable, m- but it did not. It was. It had a very narrow focus. Right? When you
mhm,
are an administrator of a program, your focus is on this one thing. And really, when that program went away and I no longer had that responsibility, that's when I had the opportunity to really think and look more broadly. And
mm.
that's what
Oh,
gives you the creative possibility to engage
yeah.
in new and different endeavors in my case.
That is so cool. Yeah, and that is such a good point, Jen. Of like, that is why we have to let go of things, right? That is why we have to open up to the possibilities, to let those old things go and to open up. And I just love that you said that you expanded your network because this is such an important part of opening up that summertime, opening up to possibilities is seeing what's out there, right? Connecting with people. Those connections, so many times when we just are out there and you're sharing yourself and you're open to what is, it's like the sense of play, right? You're open to these connections. It starts to then, you start to get this narrowing that happens. So this graphic kind of looks like a funnel where it seems counterintuitive, but when you are exploring all those connections with people, or like in my case, like I was, going to see apartments or going out there and looking at what is it that I want, then it starts to narrow your focus where you're like, oh, you probably had this experience where you're like, oh, okay, I'm making this connection and there seems to be a theme here, right? And I'm really good at this. And you start to get an idea of like, oh, I'm good at this and I'm good at this. And this is where people are seeing my strengths and where my value lies. And did you kind of see that happen in that process, Jen?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it gave me the opportunity to exercise some skills and some capacities
Uh-huh.
that I
Practice.
had, but I that had been really latent for a pretty long
Yeah.
time.
Mm.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, absolutely. So you're getting to know your skills and how they work. It's beautiful.
This is making so much sense to me with the seasons because in the summertime, like the kids are out of school, as
Yeah.
academics, we're not working on the same schedule we're used to. So in the summertime, we're meeting people. And for anyone, like you're out a lot more. You've got this sun energy that gives you energy to, go to parties or go to the park or go on a hike. And when you're out in the
Mingle.
world, you meet people, right? And
Yeah.
maybe over the summer, you meet 100 people, but maybe
Mhm.
3 of those 100 people are people you're like, "Oh, that person seems really cool. I wanna continue
Mhm.
this relationship." So,
Yeah.
and that's who you take into the fall. In the fall, you're like, "Oh, those were the coolest people I met this summer. I'm gonna make sure that we have something planned for the fall, and I'm gonna follow up on that."
Yeah, I love that. I love and they spark something in you, right? So it's good to note, like, in the winter, it really is about being alone a lot, about really, like, being with yourself and establishing that connection, and once you have that connection and you know what you need and want, then going out there and being with people, it's like you people who are introverts really understand this, right? You really need that established connection with yourself, and then when you go out, it's like you also get energy and get excitement and get ideas from people and they do from you and that connection. That's yeah. And the
Awesome.
other thing that happens, so there's also kind of two things in summer, right? Like summer, towards the end, we start getting into fall, and so towards the end, we start to like that focus becomes more narrow, and we start to realize, oh, fall is coming. Things, maybe whatever we've planted starts to actually be ripe and be ripened and like ready to pick, right? So we're
Mm.
starting to get to this place where we're like using a little bit more of our logical mind to filter things down. So like Jen, in that case, like maybe you're like, well, I like this part of what I've been doing, but I don't like this part, and this is what I'm going to focus on.
Mm.
Right? So from all those connections during that summertime, like if you think about late summer, things get a little bit more serious feeling, right? As we start to think about going back to school or like getting back, like we're talking about getting back into routine. So we start to find a little bit more of that like energy, that focus energy, and realizing, okay, this is what I want actually. Does that
Yeah,
make sense?
I feel like I'm in the W right now, which
Mhm.
perfectly aligns with the actual seasons. We're going into fall right now. Um, because Esther and I just signed a book contract
Oh
Woohoo!
my gosh.
And we're super excited. We're going to be working with 619 Wreath, which is an amazing new publishing company. And so excited. But it started off with winter, and I think it literally was the winter season when we first started trying to figure out what we were doing. So I just texted Esther one day and I said, "We should write a book together." And she's like, "Oh, okay, yeah. What's the book about?" And so we just had these like Zoom meetings every week, every couple weeks or something, and we just said, "Let's just talk about stuff." And we'll just talk and come up with ideas and figure out what's going on. And that was totally finding inspiration. And this was towards the beginning of the pandemic when everyone was kind of feeling like we were in some sort of winter, like we were
Yeah,
all
big
kind of
winter.
locked down, looking inwards, getting sick of just being with ourselves.
I just saw that photo from pop up in my Facebook of you at my house when we were writing in my studio. It was like
Oh my gosh.
2021. Yeah.
Oh, geez. Yeah, so this is a long process. Sometimes a year is really like 5 years, um but yeah, that was the F, and now, like, we've gone all through the letting go of assumptions, like, "Oh, we an
Oh
artist and a
man.
mathematician can't write a book together? That's really weird."
Oh, it's the assumptions are still,
Yeah,
I mean, it's just it's like
it's a constant battle.
this is the hardest creative project I've ever had because of the assumptions that just
Mm,
keep they are just so prevalent. Like,
mhm.
finding my writing voice and like, oh, I can't say this or I can't say this. And Just
Mhm.
keep letting go of the assumptions. But yeah, we're really feels like we're in the W,
Totally. We opened
the
up to
fall.
possibilities of who the book might be for, what type of publisher we might look for. And, we did the networking, we talked to people, we attended classes on how to get an agent and write a book proposal. And that's all part of the O. And now we get to work it. So it just seems like it's perfectly aligned, and especially with the seasons as we're going into fall, establishing a good work schedule because we're gonna make it happen. So,
Yeah. Well, we signed the
yep,
contract. It has to happen.
it has to happen now. Yes. Well, that's good. I mean,
Yeah.
that actually is a big part of the W. When you're ready to
Mhm.
work it, you know what you wanna do. Like, building an
Yeah.
accountability to actually do it is a huge part of working it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean the fall, if you think about fall, it's, I like to say like 75% of the creative process you should be in sort of like this very open, playful mode,
Mm.
right? But once you get into late summer and fall, it feels a little bit serious, more serious. You can kind of feel it. Um, and that's because you are getting into that focused, that, more of that executive network focus. And um, so you want to think about like, having I just revised like my calendar, which felt really good. So putting things down on the calendar, and jumping off those big cliffs, like signing the contract. Oh my gosh, this
Mhm.
is a commitment. Having those people who can support you. And if you think about like a farmer who's now we're reaping all of the benefits of everything that we've, been working so hard on for the whole year. And
Mhm.
really it's like we want to share it with people, right? Like the farmer, it like they don't just maybe they keep it for their family, but like they're gonna sell it or share it or like, most of the time it's for the community,
Mhm.
right? So where where is this thing gonna live? Think about like how do we want to get it out there too? Like once you're, done with it. Like, does anybody else have an example of like a season, like fall season, where you started like, putting whatever transition you were going through, like putting it into play and like really making those commitments and some of the things that you had to think about?
I have a million of those. But, Jen, can we go back to your example? Because I think, some folks know your story from listening to your interview a couple episodes back, but others might not have heard about, what working it looked like for you. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. Yeah. So, um, where I really find joy and my creative juices in an educational setting come around designing and implementing programs. And this is kind of like program in a broad sense. Things that serve students. So, to give one example, I designed and implemented a peer mentor program in our college to make connections between incoming students who are just learning how to do college and upper division students who would be available as resources for them. So, this for me, like this fall season of working it is when you've made all the plans, you've thought about who are going to be your people, what the project might look like, what do we want to do, kind of what are going to be our programs, our different events throughout the year. And then the academic year starts. And then there are real people involved. And then, right, this this is when um you just have to kind of like get into making all of your decisions on the fly about how do we really implement all of these things that previously, plans on
Mhm.
paper look great, but the actual implementation, the actual launching a program and making those connections with students and having events and kind of tracking the kind of the impact that our programs are having on our students, that's all stuff that just have to happen live and in the moment. And that for me is what work in it is all about.
Yes, and that reminds me too of the process of doing math research, actually. Like in the beginning, you're playing with ideas. You're playing with some mathematical objects. You're kind of figuring out, oh, well, will this technique work for this kind of object? Or like, what are the properties of this thing? Oh, let's run some simulations and see what happens. And then fast forward through the L and the O, and you get to the end where you figured out your results and you figured out, what's going on with the math, and you have to sit down and write the paper.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you have to write, and often when you're writing the paper, you think, "Oh, shoot. Well, we thought it was working that way, but there's a little gap in our reasoning here. So,
Mhm.
okay, we're gonna have to go figure out,
Go back
how to
through the
f
form go back through the
how to fix that."
flow.
Yeah, but you're sitting down, you're writing,
Mhm.
and you are maybe planning to giving talks to people in your research field, to
Yeah.
publicize your work and put it out there. And that seems to be part of the W. You're like, you've done the work, you've done the playing, you've figured out how things work, and now it's about communicating. And
Yeah.
really getting clear on what you've done. Like, "Oh, I've
Yep.
done
Yep.
this. Let me record what I've done and share it with other people and let
Yeah.
my work be its own thing out in the world now. And from that, we can start again."
Yeah.
Now that these ideas are out in the world and people are reacting to them, well, what direction could I go in next? Like maybe
Mhm.
I want to work on how my work connects with this other person's new work. And okay, now let's find inspiration for that and explore those possibilities. And you find yourself in winter again.
Exactly. Yep. And it's the same with the creating art, right? It's like if you're creating a new collection, like you want to find that inspiration. And a lot of artists get stuck because they're like, "Oh, well, this is the art that works, so I should just keep doing that." Well, no, you're not. Most likely there's something inside you that is going to want you to start over, like not start over, but start from where you are and grow and expand. And so you go through the whole process, and at the end it's like a lot of artists also have trouble bringing everything together, getting out of that play stage and bringing everything together. And a lot of artists have trouble sharing their work, right?
Mm.
It's really hard writing an artist statement or like contacting galleries so that it can actually be shown, or sharing it on in showing up. Because when you
Mm.
create something, I mean, literally life is like telling you you have something more to give, right? Whatever is going on in your life. It could be like you're creating art, it could be like whatever in your career or moving, but life is like, okay, next step, come on. Like it's like encouraging you, like, okay, you have something more. And when you get to the point where you get to that fall stage, you should be very like solid in your the value of your work, the value of
Mm.
yourself, or whatever you're moving into, right? And be excited about it. And so
Mhm.
that's hard. It's hard if we have a lot of like those, layers of beliefs and stuff. But yeah, like because it is a gift, like whatever it is it's a gift for you or for the community that you're in, right? Like both of those examples are that you both shared are like so beautiful. And also the artist example, it's like these are all in our work gifts that we have grown within us to share,
Yeah.
and I think that's a beauty of life and the process,
Yeah,
you
it
know.
reminds me of working with students, like working with research students and helping them prepare to give their first talk about their research.
Mm,
So it's always pretty scary for a variety of reasons. But one of the reasons is once you tell people about your work, you open yourself up to being judged by them and to
exactly.
having your work judged. But one of the cool things to help students realize that helps them get over that anxiety is they are the top world expert in what they're talking about. They know more about that thing than anyone in the world. And helping them get that understanding of the kind of power that
Mhm.
that knowledge brings them, it just like brings them so much confidence to go out in the world and really work it.
That's so beautiful. Yeah, and that's why what the work I do with coaching people is that's why I go through this process in like really understanding who you are at the core of your authentic self because it, then whenever you do this process you have this core of like, yeah, this is my value, this is the value of my work, and standing in that confidence. So yeah.
Mm,
Think, Esther, even just framing it as a gift, right? That idea of
Mm.
you have things to offer the world. That very framing of it says this has value, right?
Mhm.
I am offering something that that others can engage with. And I think, Allison, your example also calls to mind for me the idea that it's a conversation, right? When we're working it, when we're putting our creative ideas out into the world, what we're doing is we're engaging in conversation with our audience, with with our community, uh,
mhm.
and there's something really really powerful and beautiful about that as well.
Yes, and that is reminding
Yeah.
me of one of my favorite parts about this analogy is what happens at the end of fall. You party. This is like the best time
Oh,
of year. You party. You have so many parties in December. And Jen's
yeah.
birthday is in December too. So she's got extra reasons to
Mm,
party. But what do? You get together with your friends and your family and you celebrate. You celebrate the new
yeah.
year. You celebrate the holidays. And you get to look back on your year and think about what you've accomplished and how far you've
Accomplished,
come.
yeah. Oh, that's such an important part that I think we all forget about. I do. I've really been trying, to really embrace and receive that, yeah, just that sense of accomplishment, and, like, I was at our show opening, and I was just, like, trying to just really embrace the feeling of excitement and appreciation and like that I did a good job. We all did a good job, and like it feels that feeling, that just
Yeah.
feels so good. And whether like we're talking about career stuff, but whether it's career or whether you moved, just that feeling of like, wow. I mean, Tony and I talk about it all the time with the apartment. It's like I can't believe we, like, manifested this place or, like, we like, we found this like, we did it together, and it just feels so good, and just, like, appreciating that is that's so cool. I love that.
Yeah, my husband James and I had a moment like that this morning, actually. our son started kindergarten and
Mm.
our daughter started preschool today. And James suggested to me after we dropped our daughter off, hey, why don't we go for breakfast at the place where we used to go after your fertility treatments?
Mm.
So every time I would have a fertility treatment, we would go for brunch at the Sorrento. And he said, why don't we go for brunch at the Sorrento and celebrate how far we've come?
Oh my
So
gosh. I'm like tearing up. That
I
is
know, me
so
too.
beautiful. I
But
mean, talk
it
about,
was, yeah,
yeah.
our way of celebrating. Like,
Mm,
we did it. We worked it. We
yeah.
sent our kid on the school bus today.
And you were even like, "Oh yeah, I didn't do any work today." But it's like, yeah, you need that. You need to take that time to celebrate. That's such a good point. I love that.
So, what's our 4% for our listeners today?
Jen, do you want to talk about the
Sure.
4%?
Well, listeners, you have heard us talk about the seasons and talk about what seasons we've been in. And now it's your turn. Take a little bit of time to identify what season are you in now? And then our further challenge is for you to think about what is your intention for this season for yourself.
Thank
That's
you. I
beautiful.
love
Thank
that.
you.
Yeah, I love that because, intentions are everything. So, like, if you are in a winter season, just thinking about, oh, yeah, I am in this winter. It's like really hard. It's confusing. I don't know where I'm going, but I don't need to produce anything right now, right? I don't need to
Mm,
produce anything. I could just go inward, recognize where I am, and then start to find inspiration. Or if you're in fall, oh yeah, I actually do need to be hustling. I have the energy, or I have to get the energy to like do this. And um,
mhm,
so intentions are beautiful because they help us to focus.
mhm.
So yeah, I love that.
Well, listeners, thank you for coming along with us today on this conversation about how the flow method aligns with the seasons. And if you are enjoying this podcast, we hope that you'll consider subscribing, liking, writing a review, sharing with your friends that our podcast is interesting or useful. And we hope you'll come join us next time.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. You've been listening to the Flow into Authenticity podcast with your hosts, Esther Loopstra, Jen Sorensen, and me, Allison Henrich. Our original theme music is by James Wetzel, and James Wetzel also does sound editing. If you like what you've heard today, we hope that you will subscribe, like, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast app.